My name is Sarah, and I'm a 32-year-old kindergarten teacher living in the suburbs of Chicago. I love my job. There's something incredibly rewarding about shaping young minds and watching them discover the world. My life was pretty ordinary, filled with the usual joys and stresses. I had a comfortable home, a stable career, and a husband, Mark, whom I thought I knew inside and out. We'd been together for 7 years, married for 5, and our life was, well, it was comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. We had fallen into a routine of dinner, television, and early bedtimes. Romance had taken a backseat to mortgages and grocery lists. Mark worked as a software engineer, a job that paid well enough for us to live comfortably and even save a little each month. We had a joint bank account where we deposited our paychecks and from which we paid our bills. We had always been transparent about our finances, or so I thought. I handled most of the bill paying while Mark managed our investments. It was a system that worked, or at least it had been working. One Tuesday morning, I decided to check our bank balance. We were planning a small vacation, and I wanted to see how much we had saved. I logged into our account online, and my heart nearly stopped. The balance was significantly lower than it should have been, thousands of dollars missing. Panic set in. Had we been hacked? Was there some mistake? I immediately called the bank, and after a lengthy conversation with a customer service representative, I learned that a large sum of money had been transferred out of our account in a series of transactions over the past few weeks. The transfers were made online, and they were authorized using Mark's login credentials. I felt a cold dread wash over me. It couldn't be Mark, could it? He wouldn't do something like that, would he? I tried to call him, but he didn't answer. I left a message, my voice trembling, asking him to call me back immediately. The rest of the day was a blur. I struggled to focus on my students, my mind racing with questions and anxieties. As soon as the school day ended, I raced home, hoping to find Mark there with a reasonable explanation. But the house was empty. I sat on the couch, staring at the walls, the silence amplifying my fear. Finally, hours later, Mark walked through the door, looking tired and stressed. I confronted him immediately, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. He denied everything at first, claiming he had no idea what I was talking about. But I pressed him, showing him the bank statements, the transaction details. He finally broke down, confessing that he had transferred the money. But to whom? And why? His answer was like a punch to the gut. He had given the money to his ex-girlfriend, Lisa. He explained that Lisa was in some kind of financial trouble, that she was facing eviction and desperately needed help. He claimed she had nowhere else to turn and had begged him for assistance. He said he felt obligated to help her, that he couldn't stand by and watch her lose everything. I was speechless. The betrayal was overwhelming. Not only had he secretly emptied our bank account, but he had done it to help his ex-girlfriend, the woman he supposedly left behind for me. All the doubts and insecurities I had ever harbored about our relationship resurfaced with a vengeance. I felt like I didn't even know the man I had married. We argued for hours that night, our voices escalating until they echoed through the house. I accused him of being dishonest, of disrespecting our marriage, of putting his ex-girlfriend before me. He tried to defend his actions, claiming he had only wanted to help a friend in need, that it was a one-time thing, and that he would pay the money back. But his words rang hollow. The trust was broken, perhaps irreparably. I spent the night in the guest room, unable to bear the thought of sharing a bed with him. Sleep evaded me, my mind replaying the events of the day, each revelation more painful than the last. I couldn't understand how he could do this to me, to us. Had our marriage meant so little to him that he would risk everything for someone from his past? The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was thick with tension. Mark tried to apologize, to explain himself again, but I couldn't listen. I told him I needed space, that I needed time to process everything that had happened. I went to work, but I was a shell of myself, going through the motions, barely able to focus on the children. My colleagues noticed my distress, but I couldn't bring myself to confide in them. The shame and embarrassment were too great. After work, I went to see my best friend, Emily. I poured out the whole story, tears streaming down my face as I recounted Mark's betrayal. Emily listened patiently, offering words of comfort and support. She was furious on my behalf, telling me that Mark's actions were unacceptable and that I deserved better. She urged me to consider my options carefully, to not rush into any decisions, but to prioritize my own well-being. As I drove home that evening, I knew I couldn't continue living like this, with this cloud of mistrust and resentment hanging over me. Something had to change. I needed to take control of the situation to protect myself and my future. But how? What could I do to make things right? As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Mark's car parked in front of the house. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for another confrontation. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a long and complicated journey, a journey that would test my strength, my resolve, and my capacity for forgiveness. What I would soon discover was a web of deceit far more intricate than I could ever have imagined, and the revenge I would ultimately seek would be far more calculated and satisfying than I could have ever planned. I walked into the house, and Mark was waiting for me, his face etched with worry. He started to apologize again, but I cut him off. I told him I needed some space, that I was going to stay with Emily for a few days to clear my head. He looked devastated, but he didn't argue. He knew he had messed up badly, and he knew he had a lot of making up to do. As I packed a bag, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Something didn't quite add up. Mark's story about Lisa needing help seemed too simplistic, too convenient. I decided to do some digging. After settling in at Emily's, I started by searching for Lisa online. It didn't take long to find her social media profiles. Her Facebook page was filled with pictures of her living a lavish lifestyle, traveling to exotic destinations, wearing expensive clothes, and dining at fancy restaurants. There was no sign of financial hardship, no indication that she was struggling to make ends meet. In fact, she seemed to be thriving. I felt a surge of anger and betrayal. Mark had lied to me. He hadn't given the money to Lisa to help her avoid eviction. He had given it to her to fund her extravagant lifestyle. But why? What was really going on between them? I delved deeper, scouring Lisa's social media for clues. I noticed that she frequently tagged a particular hotel in Miami. I did a quick search and discovered that it was a luxury resort, known for its high prices and exclusive clientele. I cross-referenced the dates of Lisa's stays at the hotel with Mark's credit card statements. To my horror, I found several transactions for flights and hotel bookings in Miami, all made around the same time as Lisa's visits. The pieces started to fall into place. Mark wasn't just helping Lisa out of a financial bind, he was having an affair with her. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt sick to my stomach, my heart pounding in my chest. The man I had loved and trusted had been lying to me for months, betraying me in the most intimate way possible. I spent the next few days and a daze, oscillating between anger, grief, and disbelief. Emily was a constant source of support, listening to my rants, offering practical advice, and reminding me that I was strong and capable. I knew I couldn't stay in this state of shock forever. I needed to take action, to confront Mark and Lisa, and to reclaim my life. But how? What was the best way to handle this situation? I considered several options. I could confront Mark and demand a divorce. I could expose his affair to his family and friends. I could even seek revenge on Lisa, trying to ruin her reputation or her relationship. But none of those options felt quite right. They were too impulsive, too emotional. I wanted to approach this situation strategically to make sure I came out on top. I decided to consult a lawyer. I needed to understand my legal rights and options before I made any rash decisions. Emily recommended a reputable divorce attorney, Sarah Jenkins, who specialized in high-asset cases. I made an appointment to see her the following week. As I waited for my appointment, I continued to gather evidence of Mark's affair. I meticulously documented all the suspicious transactions, the social media posts, the hotel bookings. I wanted to be prepared when I met with Sarah Jenkins, to have all the facts at my fingertips. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. I couldn't believe how brazen Mark had been, how easily he had lied to me, how little respect he had shown for our marriage. I vowed to make him pay for his betrayal, to make him regret the day he ever crossed me. But I knew I had to be patient, to play my cards right, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Little did Mark know, I was about to turn the tables on him in a way he never saw coming. The carefully constructed life he had built was about to come crashing down around him, and I was going to be the one holding the wrecking ball. He thought he was so clever, so discreet, but he had underestimated me. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my trust for naivete. He was about to learn that a woman scorned is a force to be reckoned with, and that revenge is a dish best served cold. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the game was about to begin. The day of my appointment with Sarah Jenkins finally arrived. I felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation as I walked into her office. Sarah was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 40s, with a reputation for being one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. She greeted me warmly and led me into her office, which was tastefully decorated with diplomas, awards, and family photos. I sat down and began to recount my story, starting with the missing money and ending with the discovery of Mark's affair. I presented her with all the evidence I had gathered: the bank statements, the credit card transactions, the social media posts. Sarah listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions and taking detailed notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and gave me a sympathetic look. "I'm sorry you're going through this, Sarah," she said. "It sounds like you've been through a lot." She then proceeded to explain my legal rights and options. She told me that since we lived in a community property state, I was entitled to half of all the assets we had acquired during our marriage. This included our house, our savings, our investments, and even Mark's retirement accounts. She also said that I could potentially seek alimony, depending on Mark's income and my ability to support myself. "But what about the money he gave to his girlfriend?" I asked. "Can I get that back?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, we can argue that Mark misappropriated marital funds by giving them to his mistress. We can ask the court to order him to reimburse the marital estate for that amount." She then explained the process of filing for divorce, serving Mark with the papers, and engaging in discovery, where we would exchange information and documents with the other side. She also warned me that divorce proceedings could be long and expensive, especially if Mark decided to fight back. "But I'm not afraid of a fight," I said, my voice firm. "I want to make sure he pays for what he's done." Sarah smiled. "I like your attitude, Sarah. With your cooperation and the evidence you've gathered, I'm confident we can get you a fair settlement." We spent the next hour discussing strategy, outlining our goals, and preparing for the legal battle ahead. I left Sarah's office feeling empowered and determined. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready to fight for what was rightfully mine. The first step was to file for divorce. Sarah prepared the paperwork and arranged for a process server to deliver it to Mark. I decided to wait for him at home, so I could see his reaction when he received the news. A few days later, the process server arrived at our house and handed Mark the divorce papers. I watched from the window as he read them, his face turning white with shock. He stormed into the house, yelling my name, demanding to know what was going on. I met him in the living room, my expression calm and resolute. "I'm divorcing you, Mark," I said. "I know about Lisa and I know about the money you gave her. I'm not going to let you get away with this." Mark tried to deny everything, but I cut him off. I presented him with the evidence I had gathered: the bank statements, the credit card transactions, the social media posts. He couldn't deny it any longer. He broke down, begging me to forgive him, promising to change. But I had heard enough lies. I told him it was over, that I never wanted to see him again. I ordered him to leave the house, and he reluctantly complied. As he drove away, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The first battle had been won, but the war was far from over. I knew Mark wouldn't give up easily. He would fight me every step of the way, but I was ready for him. I had Sarah Jenkins on my side, and I had the truth on my side, and I was determined to get what I deserved. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. We exchanged documents, took depositions, and attended court hearings. Mark hired his own attorney, a slick, aggressive lawyer who tried to intimidate me and discredit my evidence. But Sarah Jenkins was more than a match for him. She skillfully countered his arguments, presented compelling evidence, and exposed Mark's lies. The divorce proceedings dragged on, but I remained focused on my goal: to get a fair settlement and to make Mark pay for his betrayal. As the case progressed, I learned more and more about Mark's financial dealings. I discovered that he had been hiding assets, transferring money to offshore accounts, and undervaluing his business. He was desperate to protect his wealth and to avoid paying me what I was owed. But Sarah Jenkins was relentless. She used every legal tool at her disposal to uncover Mark's hidden assets and to expose his fraudulent activities. Finally, after months of grueling negotiations, we reached a settlement agreement. Mark agreed to give me half of all our assets, including the house, the savings, the investments, and his retirement accounts. He also agreed to reimburse the marital estate for the money he had given to Lisa. In addition, he was ordered to pay me alimony for a period of 5 years. I had won. I had got everything I wanted and more. Mark was devastated. He had lost his wife, his money, and his reputation. He was left with nothing but regret and shame. As I signed the settlement agreement, I felt a sense of closure wash over me. The nightmare was finally over. I was free, I was independent, and I was ready to start a new chapter in my life, But my revenge wasn't complete yet. I still had one more score to settle, one more person to confront: Lisa. With the divorce settlement finalized, I turned my attention to Lisa. I knew that Mark's affair with her had caused irreparable damage to my marriage, and I wanted her to pay for her role in it. But I didn't want to resort to petty or vindictive tactics. I wanted to inflict a more calculated and satisfying form of revenge. I decided to go after her where it would hurt the most: her reputation and her social standing. I knew that Lisa was very active on social media, constantly posting pictures of her lavish lifestyle and boasting about her travels and her accomplishments. She craved attention and validation, and she was very concerned about her image. I decided to use that against her. I created a fake social media account under a pseudonym and started following Lisa's every move. I liked her posts, commented on her photos, and generally acted like a supportive fan. But behind the scenes, I was gathering information and planning my attack. I discovered that Lisa had a secret blog where she wrote about her personal life, her relationships, and her opinions on various topics. She used the blog to promote herself and to attract followers. I also learned that she was planning to launch a new business, a luxury travel agency that catered to wealthy clients. This was the perfect opportunity to strike. I waited until Lisa had announced the launch of her new business and had started promoting it heavily on social media. Then, I unleashed my plan. I started posting anonymous comments on her blog and her social media accounts, revealing details about her affair with Mark and exposing her as a gold digger. I included screenshots of the bank statements and credit card transactions that showed how Mark had funded her lavish lifestyle. I also shared some of the more embarrassing details from her blog posts, making her look foolish and hypocritical. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Lisa's followers were shocked and disgusted by the revelations. They started unfollowing her, leaving angry comments and spreading the word about her affair. Her reputation was in tatters. Her new business was doomed before it even started. Lisa was devastated. She tried to deny the allegations, but the evidence was too strong. She lashed out at me, calling me names and threatening to sue me. But I remained anonymous, hiding behind my fake social media account. I watched with satisfaction as her world crumbled around her. She had lost her reputation, her business, and her social standing. She was a pariah in her own community. My revenge was complete, but I didn't stop there. I wanted to make sure that Lisa learned a valuable lesson from this experience. I sent her an anonymous message, telling her that her behavior was unacceptable and that she needed to take responsibility for her actions. I told her that she had hurt a lot of people, including me, and that she needed to make amends. I also encouraged her to seek therapy and to address her underlying issues. To my surprise, Lisa actually listened. She apologized to me for her role in the affair and admitted that she had made some serious mistakes. She also started attending therapy and working on herself. I was impressed by her willingness to change and to take responsibility for her actions. I decided to forgive her and to move on with my life. I closed the fake social media account and stopped following her. I never heard from her again. In the end, my revenge wasn't just about punishing Mark and Lisa. It was also about reclaiming my power and my self-respect. It was about standing up for myself and refusing to be a victim. It was about learning from my mistakes and becoming a stronger, more resilient person. The divorce was difficult and painful, but it ultimately led me to a better place. I learned a lot about myself, about relationships, and about the importance of self-care. I also discovered that I was capable of anything I set my mind to. I started focusing on my career, my hobbies, and my friendships. I traveled, I volunteered, and I pursued my passions. I surrounded myself with positive, supportive people who loved and appreciated me for who I was. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my life, brick by brick, and I emerged from the ashes a stronger, wiser, and more confident woman. Looking back, I don't regret seeking revenge on Mark and Lisa. They deserved what they got, but I also learned that revenge is not always the answer. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living well and moving on, and that's exactly what I did. I found happiness, fulfillment, and peace of mind, and I never looked back. Years have passed since the divorce and the elaborate revenge I orchestrated. I've rebuilt my life as I promised myself I would. My career is thriving. I've traveled to places I only dreamed of, and I've cultivated deep, meaningful friendships. The pain of Mark's betrayal has faded, replaced by a sense of quiet strength and self-assurance. But the story doesn't quite end there. About a year ago, I received a message on LinkedIn from an unfamiliar name. Intrigued, I clicked on the profile and saw a picture of a woman who looked vaguely familiar. It took me a moment, but then it hit me. It was Lisa. Her profile indicated that she was now working as a life coach, specializing in helping people recover from infidelity and betrayal. I was stunned. Had she really turned her life around? Was she genuinely trying to make amends for her past mistakes? Part of me was skeptical, but another part of me was curious. I decided to respond to her message. To my surprise, Lisa was incredibly humble and sincere. She apologized again for her role in the affair with Mark and acknowledged the pain she had caused me. She explained that her experience had led her down a path of self-discovery and healing, and that she now felt a calling to help others who had gone through similar situations. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, she said, but she hoped that one day I could see that she had truly changed. We exchanged a few more messages, and I found myself starting to believe her. She seemed genuinely remorseful and committed to making a positive impact on the world. I still couldn't completely forget the past, but I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. A few months later, I received another message from Lisa. She was organizing a workshop for people who had been affected by infidelity, and she asked if I would be willing to share my story as part of the event. I hesitated. The thought of reliving those painful memories in front of a group of strangers was daunting. But then I realized that this could be an opportunity to help others who were struggling with similar issues. And perhaps it could also be a way to finally put the past behind me. I agreed to participate. The workshop was held in a small, intimate setting. There were about a dozen attendees, all of whom had been affected by infidelity in some way. Some were survivors of affairs, like me, while others were trying to rebuild their relationships after committing infidelity themselves. When it was my turn to speak, I shared my story openly and honestly. I talked about the pain of Mark's betrayal, the anger and resentment I had felt, and the elaborate revenge I had sought. I also talked about the healing process, the lessons I had learned, and the importance of forgiveness. As I spoke, I could see tears in the eyes of some of the attendees. They nodded in understanding and shared their own stories of heartbreak and resilience. It was a powerful and cathartic experience for all of us. After the workshop, several people approached me to thank me for sharing my story. They said that it had given them hope and inspiration, and that it had helped them feel less alone in their struggles. I realized that my pain had not been in vain. It had allowed me to connect with others on a deep and meaningful level and to make a positive impact on their lives. And then something unexpected happened. Mark showed up. He stood at the back of the room, looking hesitant and ashamed. He waited until everyone else had left before approaching me. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. It had been years since I had last seen him, and he looked much older and more worn down. "What are you doing here, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I came to apologize," he said, "to you and to everyone else I hurt." He went on to explain that he had been struggling with guilt and regret for years, and that he had finally decided to seek help. He had been attending therapy and working on his issues, and he wanted to make amends for his past mistakes. He knew that what he had done was wrong, and he was deeply sorry for the pain he had caused me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he said, but he hoped that one day I could see that he had truly changed. I looked into his eyes and saw a flicker of sincerity. I could tell that he was genuinely remorseful and that he had finally come to terms with the consequences of his actions. I thought about all the anger and resentment I had harbored towards him for so long, and then I let it go. I realized that holding on to that negativity was only hurting me. It was time to forgive him and move on. "I forgive you, Mark," I said. A look of relief washed over his face. He thanked me profusely and then turned to leave. As he walked away, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The circle was finally complete. I had sought revenge, I had found healing, and I had offered forgiveness. The past was behind me, and I was ready to embrace the future with an open heart. And that, I realized, was the ultimate revenge. Not on Mark, not on Lisa, but on the pain and betrayal that had once threatened to consume me. I had emerged from the darkness stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, and that was a victory worth celebrating. Life moved on after that day in the workshop, but it never stopped being interesting. I continued teaching, finding joy in the small victories of my kindergartners. The way their eyes lit up when they finally grasped a new concept, the pure, unadulterated excitement they expressed over finger painting. I even started taking art classes myself, rediscovering a passion I'd abandoned years ago. My social life blossomed. I joined a book club, started hiking with a group of friends, and even dipped my toes into the world of online dating. There were a few awkward encounters, some promising sparks that fizzled out, but overall, it was a fun and liberating experience. I was learning to love myself again, to embrace my independence, and to define my own happiness, not through a relationship, but through my own achievements and passions. Emily remained my rock, always there with a listening ear, a bottle of wine, and a healthy dose of sarcasm when I needed it most. She had even started her own business as a life coach, inspired by my journey and her own experiences. We often joked about writing a book together, a guide for women navigating the treacherous waters of divorce and betrayal. But fate, as it often does, had other plans in store for me, plans that would once again test my strength, my resilience, and my capacity for forgiveness. It started with a phone call, a late-night call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was a long pause and then a shaky voice on the other end. "Sarah, is that you?" It took me a moment to place the voice, but then it clicked. It was Mark's mother, Carol. "Carol, what's wrong?" I asked, my heart rate immediately increasing. Carol was never one to call unless it was something serious. She was always kind to me, even after the divorce, and I had a soft spot for her. "It's Mark, dear," she said, her voice thick with tears. He's been in an accident." My breath caught in my throat. "An accident? What kind of accident? Is he okay?" "He was driving home from work last night and a drunk driver hit him head-on," she explained, her voice breaking. "He's in the hospital, Sarah. He's in critical condition." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mark in the hospital, fighting for his life. It didn't seem real. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the betrayal and the pain, I couldn't help but feel a surge of concern for him. He was still a human being, and no one deserved to suffer like that. "Which hospital, Carol? I'll be right there." The drive to the hospital was a blur. My mind raced with a mix of emotions: shock, disbelief, fear, and even a strange sense of guilt. Was this some kind of karmic retribution for the revenge I had sought? Was I somehow responsible for what had happened to him? When I arrived at the hospital, I found Carol sitting in the waiting room, looking pale and distraught. She rushed to me and embraced me tightly. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know who else to call." I sat down next to her and took her hand. "How is he, Carol? What are the doctors saying?" "They're doing everything they can," she replied, her eyes red and swollen. "He's in surgery now. They say he has a severe head injury and multiple broken bones." We sat in silence for what felt like hours, waiting for news. I couldn't help but think about all the times Mark and I had spent in this very hospital, visiting sick relatives or celebrating the birth of new babies. It was a place filled with both joy and sorrow, a place that held so many memories, both good and bad. As I sat there, I realized that despite everything that had happened, Mark would always be a part of my life, a chapter in my story. We had shared so much together, and even though our relationship had ended in pain and betrayal, I couldn't deny the love and happiness we had once shared. The doctor finally emerged from surgery, his face grim. He explained that Mark's condition was still critical and that he would need to remain in the intensive care unit for the next few days. He couldn't make any promises, he said, but they would do everything they could to save him. Carol and I spent the rest of the night in the waiting room, taking turns visiting Mark in the ICU. He was unconscious, hooked up to machines, his face bruised and swollen. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, of how quickly things can change. As I sat by his bedside, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held for him, for us. Would he recover? Would we ever be able to truly forgive each other? And what role would I play in his life moving forward? The next morning, the doctor called Carol and me into a private room. He explained that Mark's condition had deteriorated overnight. He had suffered a stroke, and his brain damage was more extensive than they had initially thought. He said that even if he survived, he would likely have permanent cognitive and physical impairments. Carol broke down in tears. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was worse than I could have imagined. The doctor asked us to consider Mark's wishes regarding life support. He explained that if his condition didn't improve, they would have to make a decision about whether to continue aggressive treatment or to withdraw care and allow him to pass away peacefully. Carol was unable to make a decision. She was too distraught, too overwhelmed. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Sarah, what should we do?" she asked. "You know him better than anyone." "What do you think he would want?" I was stunned. She was asking me to make a life-or-death decision for my ex-husband, the man who had betrayed me and caused me so much pain. It was an impossible situation, a burden I didn't know if I could bear. But I knew that Carol was right. I did know Mark, perhaps better than anyone else. I knew his values, his beliefs, his hopes, and his fears. And I knew that he would never want to live a life of dependence and disability. He was a proud and independent man, and he would rather die than be a burden to others. "I think he would want us to let him go, Carol," I said, my voice trembling. "I think he would want to be at peace." Carol nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I know you're right, Sarah," she said, "but it's so hard." We spent the next few hours by Mark's bedside, holding his hand, talking to him, and saying our goodbyes. It was a heartbreaking experience, one that I will never forget. As the day wore on, Mark's breathing became shallower and his heart rate slowed. Finally, in the late afternoon, he took his last breath and slipped away peacefully. He was gone. A wave of grief washed over me, a grief that was both unexpected and profound. Despite everything that had happened, I had cared about Mark, and I was deeply saddened by his death. Carol and I embraced, weeping together, sharing our sorrow and our memories. In the days that followed, I helped Carol with the funeral arrangements and offered her my support in any way I could. I attended the funeral and paid my respects to Mark and his family. It was a somber occasion, but it also provided an opportunity for closure. I realized that Mark's death had brought us all together, reminding us of the importance of love, compassion, and forgiveness. As I stood by his graveside, I made a promise to myself to live my life to the fullest, to cherish every moment, and to never take anything for granted. And then, a week after the funeral, Carol called me again. This time, her voice was filled with a mixture of sadness and confusion. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you," she said. "It's about Mark's will." My heart sank. I had assumed that Mark's will would leave everything to his parents as he had no children. But something in Carol's voice told me that there was more to the story. "What is it, Carol?" I asked cautiously. "He left everything to you, Sarah," she said. "The house, the savings, the investments, everything." I was speechless. This couldn't be true. Mark had left everything to me, the woman he had betrayed, the woman he had divorced. It didn't make any sense. "There must be some mistake, Carol," I said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, dear," she replied. "I've seen the will myself. He specifically stated that he wanted you to inherit everything." I was stunned. Why would Mark do such a thing? What was his motivation? Was this some kind of posthumous apology? Or was there something else going on? Carol suggested that I meet with Mark's lawyer to discuss the details of the will. I agreed, although I was still incredibly confused and hesitant. A few days later, I found myself sitting in a sterile office across from a stern-looking man in a pinstripe suit. Mr. Thompson, Mark's lawyer, confirmed that Mark had indeed left everything to me in his will. He explained that Mark had updated his will shortly before his death, and that he had been very clear about his intentions. He said that Mark had felt a deep sense of guilt and remorse for the pain he had caused me, and that he wanted to make amends in any way he could. He believed that leaving me his estate was the best way to do that. I was still struggling to process this information when Mr. Thompson handed me a sealed envelope. "Mark left this for you, Sarah," he said. "He asked me to give it to you after his death." I took the envelope, my hands trembling. It was addressed to me in Mark's handwriting. I thanked Mr. Thompson and left the office, eager to read Mark's letter. I drove to a nearby park and sat down on a bench, my heart pounding in my chest. I carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. As I began to read Mark's words, tears welled up in my eyes. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began. "If you're reading this, it means that I'm gone. I'm so sorry for everything I did to you. I know that I hurt you deeply, and I will never forgive myself for the pain I caused you. I betrayed your trust, I broke your heart, and I ruined our marriage. I can only imagine how much anger and resentment you must feel towards me. I deserve it all. I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, Sarah. Even after the affair, even after the divorce, I still cared about you deeply. I regretted my actions every single day. I knew that I had made a terrible mistake, and I wished I could turn back time and undo the damage I had done. But I couldn't. All I could do was try to make amends in any way I could. That's why I'm leaving everything to you in my will. I know that it can never make up for the pain I caused you, but I hope that it will help you in some way. Use the money to travel, to pursue your dreams, to live a happy and fulfilling life. You deserve it all, Sarah. You deserve to be happy. I also want you to know that I never truly loved Lisa. She was a distraction, a fleeting escape from the problems in our marriage. But you were my soulmate, Sarah. You were the love of my life. I will always regret losing you. I hope that one day you can forgive me. I know that it's a lot to ask, but it would mean the world to me. Thank you for everything, Sarah. Thank you for the love, the laughter, and the memories. You will always hold a special place in my heart. With all my love, Mark. I sat on the bench for a long time, rereading Mark's letter, tears streaming down my face. It was a powerful and emotional message, one that finally allowed me to understand his actions and to forgive him completely. He had been carrying a heavy burden of guilt and remorse, and he had tried to make amends in the only way he knew how. I realized that his decision to leave everything to me was not just an act of apology, but also an act of love. He wanted me to be happy, to live a good life, to fulfill my dreams. And now, I had the opportunity to do just that. As I walked home that day, I felt a sense of peace and closure that I had never felt before. Mark's death had been a tragedy, but it had also brought about a profound transformation in my life. It had taught me the importance of forgiveness, compassion, and love. It had reminded me that life is precious, and that we should cherish every moment. And it had given me the opportunity to start anew, to create a life that was truly meaningful and fulfilling. I decided to honor Mark's memory by using his inheritance to make a positive impact on the world. I started a foundation to support victims of domestic violence and to promote healthy relationships. I volunteered my time at local shelters and community centers. And I continued to pursue my passions for teaching and art. I found happiness in helping others and in making a difference in the lives of those who were less fortunate. And then, one sunny afternoon, as I was teaching my kindergartners about the wonders of nature, I received a visit from a familiar face. It was Lisa. She looked different, more mature, and more serene. She had a small child in her arms, a beautiful baby girl with bright, curious eyes. "Sarah," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "I wanted to thank you." I was surprised to see her, but I welcomed her with open arms. We sat down in my classroom and she told me about her life. She had left Miami and moved to a small town in the countryside. She had married a kind and loving man, and they were raising their daughter together. She had also continued her work as a life coach, helping people to heal from their past traumas and to create fulfilling lives. "I know that I hurt you deeply," she said, her eyes filled with remorse. "And I will never forgive myself for what I did, but I want you to know that I have changed. I am a different person now." I looked at her and I could see that she was telling the truth. She had truly transformed her life. She had learned from her mistakes and she was committed to making a positive impact on the world. "I forgive you, Lisa," I said. "I know that you have changed and I am happy for you." She smiled, a genuine and heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Sarah," she said. "That means more than you know." We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories and our hopes for the future. As she was leaving, she turned to me and said, "You know, Sarah, I think Mark would be proud of both of us." I smiled and nodded. "I think you're right, Lisa," I said. "I think he would be." And as I watched her walk away, I knew that I had finally found peace. The pain of the past was gone, replaced by a sense of hope, gratitude, and love. I had learned that forgiveness is not just about letting go of anger and resentment, but also about embracing compassion and understanding. And I had discovered that even the most difficult experiences can lead to growth, healing, and transformation. I was grateful for the lessons I had learned, for the challenges I had overcome, and for the love and support I had received along the way. And as I looked ahead to the future, I knew that I was ready for whatever life had in store for me. I was a survivor, a healer, and a woman who had finally found her own path to happiness and fulfillment. My story, it seemed, was far from over. A new chapter was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see what it held. As I walked back into my classroom, my kindergartners gathered around me, their faces beaming with excitement. "Teacher Sarah, tell us a story," they cried. I smiled and sat down in my rocking chair. "All right, my little ones," I said. "Let me tell you a story about a brave and kind woman who learned to forgive and to love." And as I began to weave my tale, I knew that my journey was not just my own, but also a gift that I could share with others, inspiring them to find their own strength, their own healing, and their own happily ever after. The adventures were not over because as I spoke to the children, a distinguished-looking gentleman stood at the door.